You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You have my sword.
And you have my bow.
And my trowel.
Hi, you're listening to episode 36 of And My Trowel, where we look at the fantastic side of archaeology and the archaeological side of fantasy. I'm Tilly.
And I'm Ash.
And we are here with Dr. Sasja van de Vaart-Verschoof, chatting all about underwater landscapes. Welcome, Sasja.
Hi. Yay! So maybe we should do a little recap of exactly what we were talking about in the previous episode.
Yes, true. Good idea, good idea. So Ash and I have been charged by Dr. Ottalp to write a proposal for a project that would investigate the ancient underwater landscape of Sitnalta. For those who are not familiar with Sitnalta, it allegedly used to be above the surface, and it would join together the island civilization of Atlantis with the larger continent. To help us write this proposal, we've teamed up with Sasja because, amongst her many other talents and experiences, she has worked on a similar project looking at the ancient underwater landscape of Doggerland.
But what exactly is the Doggerland project?
True.
And could you tell us a little bit more, Sasja, about it?
Or specifically, maybe to start, what is Doggerland?
Yeah, what is Doggerland?
That's a better question because technically there isn't anything known as the Doggerland project. We just have lots of projects working on Doggerland.
Okay, this might make the next part of this episode a bit more complicated to answer, but we'll get there when we get there.
We will alter it.
Yeah. Okay, so Doggerland is the name that archaeologists have given to the land that is now currently under the North Sea. Because in various periods in prehistory, it was actually dry and people lived there. And when I say people, we're talking about almost 1 million years of human or hominid habitation.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's a decent chunk.
And so there's not people there all the time for those millions of years, because with every ice age that came and went, the landscape would flood and then it would be dry again. Then it would have a lake rather than a landscape. And then eventually it became completely submerged about 6,000 BC.
And why did it become, this might be a stupid question, but why did it become submerged? Was it too morally corrupt and the gods decided to punish it? Or
well, we don't know because, of course, we're talking about prehistory, so we have no written sources, unfortunately, for this, which is just a shame, but also really cool because then we can just keep it with the archaeology and make up whatever explanation we would like.
Yeah, we could do a Plato and be like, this thing happened 9,000 years ago,
Exactly.
but trust me, guys, this is what happened.
Exactly. Yeah, so the reason it flooded is the same reason as it flooded all the other times, is because of natural climate change. So when the climate heats up, the land ice in the north and south gets smaller. So then the sea levels rise and that just floods what is now the North Sea. The North Sea is a relatively shallow sea. So it doesn't take a lot for it to actually be underwater.
Oh, fair. Sorry, I know you just said this, but when did it sort of sink, or when did it become covered, kind of for the last time?
So the last time when it fully became submerged was about 6,000 BC, so about 8,000 years ago. Okay. And it was preceded by a couple thousand years where the sea levels were rising. So parts of the North Sea were underwater, but the higher banks, including the Dogger Bank, where the name Doggerland comes from, would have been islands at the time. Okay. So it sort of went from one big open landscape to watery with a couple of islands to the North Sea that we have today.
And this might be a really silly question, but does that have anything to do with the Sturga slide, isn't it?
Yes, it does.
Yes.
Yeah, it does. Well done.
Look at that education.
Look at you going. Jeez.
60 grams worth of education right there.
It is believed that the final flooding of Doggerland is connected to the Sturga slide, which is a lot more complicated than I'm going to explain it now, but basically a huge underwater rock slide off the coast of Scandinavia caused a tsunami that went all the way through what is now the North Sea and just wiped it all out pretty much.
That is a tsunami, yeah. Jeez.
Yeah, apparently they could see it at the coast of Scotland, like these poor people. And then, you can imagine it just coming at you and you wouldn't know what it was and boom, that would be it.
Yeah, that is the idea. I mean, as with all archaeological theories, there are people who think it was a bit more subtle and people who think it was a bit more violent. But they have found evidence of this tsunami in soil layers in parts of Scotland, for example. And it is believed that it would have been, a 20-meter high wave coming at you.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, in terms of Doggerland itself, because like you say, it makes sense, right? It was once above the sea, so of course people were there. But I mean, when did that concept or that idea first actually come into existence? Like, when did people realize that Doggerland was a thing?
Well, it actually has quite a long history in the 20th century and before that even, actually. So what makes Doggerland so interesting in terms of archaeology is that the preservation is really, really good. So a lot of the material, it's basically one big giant archaeological site, and in particular organic materials like bone and antler and even wood sometimes, which generally doesn't survive very well from deep prehistory, actually is really well preserved. And sort of the earliest records we have of people sort of becoming vaguely aware of there being something under the North Sea is already in like the 19th century, when fishermen are starting to bring up, they're starting to do more deep water fishing, and they bring up bones of, mammoths and large creatures. And so there's sort of this growing awareness of something's going on here. But at the time, they were, understanding of the world as we know it now was still developing. So people were seeing it as evidence of the Great Flood, of Noah's Great Flood.
Of course.
So that went back and forth for a little while. And then in, I want to say either 1913 or 1931, a fishing trawl named the Kalinda, that I remember. I can't remember the exact date, but I remember the fishing boat's name is the Kalinda.
It's a good name.
It is a good name. They brought up a block of peat from the bottom of the North Sea, put it on, it was on the deck of the ship, and a guy was like, took a spade and was making it smaller to chuck it back over the edge, and a beautiful point made of antler or bone, I can't remember right now, but worked animal material rolled out, and they realized actually this is made by humans. So that was sort of the first tangible evidence that people had actually lived under what is now the North Sea. And that sort of started the whole thing. Oh, actually, this whole landscape used to be dry land and it was submerged, and there's lots of evidence underneath there. And then as sort of archaeology progressed as a science and a field, the awareness of it grew. And originally, archaeologists were like, well, it's really cool that we can find all these things from the bottom of the North Sea, because they also actually, the artifacts and the bones wash up or end up on the beaches, particularly in the Netherlands, which is really cool. But it was all sort of like, since the finds are not in context and we don't have the context information, we can't really do anything with it. And then later, sort of the understanding we can learn loads from the artifacts and the bones that we get from the North Sea. And then sort of the study of Doggerland really as a specialty came up.
But it's not, I mean, because when we did our literature review last episode, I guess we were mainly looking at sort of civilizations and sort of societies that lived under. But Doggerland is not, like, there isn't the Doggerland civilization, or there's not like a big city or anything like that under there. It's just
No. I mean, you have to remember that the last people living in Doggerland that we know of was 6000 BC, which we know people were still hunter-gatherers. They lived in small groups, a very mobile existence. So there's no what we would call civilizations with, architecture pretty much anywhere at this time in that area. So that is not the case.
So there's no civilization, technically, in that kind of archaeological fantasy terms. There's no distinct culture, perhaps. So are people moving through this landscape? And if so, I mean, I was wondering about the material culture. Is there a distinctive Doggerland-esque material culture, or is it just kind of the same stuff that you're finding during the period of the later Mesolithic, kind of everywhere else? Yeah.
Well, it's a bit of both, actually. And it actually goes back far back in time, beyond the Mesolithic, because we actually start with Paleolithic habitation. So the earliest finds we have are about 950,000 years old.
Oh, wow.
From a hominid species now known as Homo antecessor. And we don't actually have any bones from the people that we're calling Homo antecessor, but we find artifacts that they used and animals that they butchered. And my favorite, off the coast of Haysborough, there are footprints left in the silt of an estuary.
That is very cool.
Yeah, so that's really cool. And then we have nothing for a while, and then later the Neanderthals make their appearance in Doggerland. And they have a very distinct material culture, but it is very similar to Neanderthal tools found elsewhere in Northwest Europe, because you have to remember that when Doggerland was dry land, it wasn't a land bridge to the UK, as it's sometimes called. It was really an incredibly rich landscape that you would have loved to live in as a hunter-gatherer. So it wasn't, like a liminal zone or anything. It was good living there. And it was connected with everywhere else. So the tools and the remains you find are very similar to those on what we would now consider dry land on the continent. But the conservation is much better of the organic materials.
Yeah.
And that particularly starts showing up when we have modern humans appearing in Doggerland, because especially like in the Netherlands, late Paleolithic and Mesolithic organic finds are very few and far between. But then if we look at the organic finds coming from the North Sea for this period, we have thousands.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are they... I think I saw something about, was there canoes or something, or boats, small boats coming up?
No.
Okay, you can scratch that then.
No, keep it in. Lash with her thingamajigger slide, wanting to show off how much she knows about Doggerland.
I did the Mesolithic, okay.
All right. But Ash can score points, though, if she can actually... I had to think for a second, but what we do have is a boat building site.
Boat building site, there we go, Tilly.
Yeah, whatever.
My favorite.
Shot in the
Discovered
dark.
thanks to a lobster.
Oh, that is cute.
Yeah.
That is very cute.
So there's actually a site called Boldner Cliff off the coast of England, where they found the remains of like a wooden dock and a wooden boat building site.
Okay, that is very cool.
Yeah, and my
That is
favorite
cool.
is that it was discovered thanks to this lobster, because a diver was sort of exploring around there and saw a lobster sort of digging out its little lair, and it was shooting out, sort of kicking out worked flint tools.
I mean, it was the original archaeologist, lobster archaeologist.
Exactly.
There you
Oh
go.
my
Exactly.
God, we should interview him.
Yes, we'll find him. We'll get him on next week.
How amazing would a children's book be based on, on the archaeologist lobster?
Lobster archaeologist, and he's doing all the underwater archaeology sites. Oh my gosh!
Oh, you need that. That needs to be put in the museum. You need to have the little lobster
trademark.
following everything.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes. Anyone,
That's
any
good.
children's books writers listening in, we're happy to, to refer to, what's the word? What's the
Collaborate.
word? Collaborate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Consult,
On the archaeology lobster.
Exactly. Sasha can edit it and we can translate it into Dutch. There we go. We'll
Yeah.
be,
Oh, brilliant.
we'll be all
Yeah.
sorted. Well, I know that we need to talk a little bit more about, this project and specifically Sasha's experience with it and how she can help us. But all of this talk of underwater landscapes has made me want to go for a little stroll along the coast, which I know, before you say, Ash, we're not near the beach here. I know, but there is a lake on the northern edge of town. Do you fancy a quick breath of fresh air?
I mean, it's not the same as the sea, but yeah, sounds good.
Okay, listener, we will be right back. I feel so much more refreshed now.
Definitely. It blew the cobwebs away.
Absolutely. So, Sasha, we talked a little bit before our lakeside stroll about Doggerland, the history of Doggerland, the history of researching Doggerland. And you also mentioned that there's actually no project Doggerland. So I'm a bit confused because I thought that there was. I thought that there was like a Doggerland project, but is there not?
Well, there is and there isn't. There's in the last couple of there's been lots of different projects focusing on lots of different aspects of Doggerland and Doggerland research. And what you're probably thinking of is the social media page that I started.
Yeah, I think that's probably what.
When I worked at the museum on Doggerland, which I think is actually called Project Doggerland, but it is intended more as a page where we share all kinds of results and insights from all the different research projects currently working on Doggerland.
So it's not one like cohesive project, it's lots of little ones that kind of collaborate with each other a bit.
Yeah, lots of big ones, but yeah.
Okay, cool.
So perhaps the best way would be to start with how I started on Doggerland, because that sort of eventually brings everything what I know about it together. So for me, my connection to Doggerland started, 4 or 5 years ago when I got a job at the National Museum of Antiquities as assistant curator to work on creating a book and exhibition about Doggerland.
Very cool.
And that actually started happening during COVID. So a lot of the things that we intended to do, which was a lot of in-person activities, were not possible. So that's why we decided to lean quite heavily into my social media skills and started the Facebook and Instagram page, Project Doggerland, where we share a lot of the results of different research projects into Doggerland.
Okay.
Yeah. And so currently there's, and that exhibition opened a couple years ago and is now traveling in a smaller form along the coast of the Netherlands in different local museums. And we wrote a book on it, first in Dutch, and then we translated that into English.
Which I was very happy about that you translated it into English.
You're very welcome.
Then I could buy it, which was great.
So those are available as sort of the starter kit on Doggerland.
And the exhibition, does that include just sort of Netherlands-based finds, or does it include all kinds of different objects from also like the coast of the UK? And
so the exhibition focused really on more on the Dutch side of things. So there were artifacts involved from the bottom of the North Sea, including finds that are closer to the British coast than to the Dutch coast. Like we have there was a fantastic collection of hand axes that one private collector had found in a gravel processing plant in the Netherlands, but they traced it back to where the gravel was harvested, and that was right off the coast.
Good for them.
That's really wow.
Wow.
Yeah, well, that's sort of the thing that they're more and more trying to do, is connect where something's from and what's coming out of that particular layer of subsoil, because there's hundreds and thousands of years of archaeology under the North Sea. So the closer you can get to relating different layers of soil to what's coming out of them, the more we can learn about the landscape and the people and the animals that live there. So currently there's 2 major research projects happening in the Netherlands into Doggerland. One coordinated by the University of Groningen, which is really looking, for example, at the...
Sorry, gotta give a shout out.
So that's the Resurfacing Doggerland project, which is a big collaboration of different people from different institutes researching sort of the Mesolithic habitation of Doggerland, of modern people like us. And then there's also the Legacy project from Naturalis Biodiversity Center, which is our natural history museum, and the University of Utrecht, where I'm from, looking more at the paleontology, at the animals that lived in Doggerland. And what makes Doggerland so exceptional, other than just the archaeology is amazing, is that the find and the bones are not just fished up from the bottom of the North Sea by fishermen. They also end up on the Dutch beaches when the beaches are reinforced or built using sand and gravel from the North Sea. So there's a huge group of citizen scientists who go walking the Dutch beaches every day and collect the Doggerland finds that are washing up.
Oh my God, I want to do that. That means I don't have to go I don't have to go into the sea.
You don't have to go in a helicopter. Be dragged out by Jason Momoa. But sorry. Yeah.
I imagine the funding we could get for Doggerland research if we could get Jason Momoa.
Oh my goodness!
On the beach,
right?
Yeah. Oh my God.
Jason,
you should contact
Jason
him.
if you're listening. which I know you're a fan of the show. So
Yeah. Don't claim that.
Also, he'll be perfect because he's into fantasy, as well. We know that. So
He is Aquaman.
He's Aquaman. He
King
has
of
a
the
rich,
seas.
he has a rich family heritage and everything as well. So he's probably interested in history and archaeology.
Probably.
As well. Interesting. Because indeed, I was going to ask, so there's not any actual excavations, because indeed all of the things that you've mentioned so far have been a lobster finding it, a fisherman finding it, or a gravel plant finding it. So I'm assuming there's no actual excavation going on this bottom of the sea.
Not on the bottom of the sea. There's a lot of coring expeditions happening where they drill into the bottom of the seabed and take out cores of soil and then trace climate change and developments through that.
Oh, cool. Okay.
There's not people actually going down and excavating full sites the way we sometimes see in rivers in the middle of the ocean, but there are some smaller excavations off the coast of England.
Okay.
When it's still a bit shallow, the lobster site was excavated.
The lobster, yeah, we know.
Discovered by the lobster and then assisted in the excavation by human archaeologists.
Okay, yeah, fair.
I'm going to take that lobster fact to
He was the
every
PI.
pub quiz that I go to now.
Yes, right. Be by the way, did you know?
By the way, did you know?
Yeah.
That even though many people think that there were boats found, actually it was a boat building thing that was found.
And it was found by a lobster.
It was found by a lobster.
Yeah.
There you go. We learn a new thing every day. Which
Exactly.
and you briefly mentioned the sort of citizen science aspect of it. And so that was, I think, what first drew me to the social media Project Doggerland thing. Because it was just so cool to see all of these people. But how did they get involved? How did you even sort of, did you contact people? Did people contact, well, not you, but, the projects, or how did that work?
A bit of everything, to be honest. So I think the first main wave of citizen science. Oh, I'm so proud of myself. I was completely unattended. But the first wave was actually when something was built that we call the Vaart-Verschoof 1, which is a completely human-made beach near Rotterdam, near the harbour. Which, as the Dutch like to do. So they went out
to say, classic Dutch.
Classic Dutch. So that's not a beach reinforced with sand from the North Sea. That is a beach completely made from sand from the North Sea. And that's where the first wave, as it were, of citizen scientists who were walking the beaches and finding all these things and this growing awareness of, actually, this is really exciting archaeology happening. And then since then, they've built the Vaart-Verschoof 2, also near the Rotterdam Harbour, which is also made entirely of sand from the North Sea. And there's a similar beach near The Hague. And so it sort of went from both sides. On the one hand, there were people who were walking the beaches, finding things, and then through various archaeological means were figuring out, actually, I have a Mesolithic barbed point, or I have a mammoth tooth, or a Neanderthal hand axe.
That's so amazing.
People from the beaches would find the archaeologists, and then archaeologists at some point were like, actually, this is an incredibly rich source of archaeology, and started working more and more with the people on the beaches. So everything to do with Doggerland relies very heavily on the efforts made by these citizen scientists, because the sand is constantly being reworked by the waves. You have to pretty much go out every day. You can't just do one search and then be done. So the scientists rely on the people, in Dutch we'd say making the miles, who are out there walking the beach every day, collecting things. And even if you're there an hour earlier or an hour later, you might find something that wasn't there before. So you need the man hours of these people collecting things, and a lot of them know exactly what they're doing. They can label everything, identify all their finds, they record what they find. So the citizens sort of fall into two groups. On the one hand, really these proper citizen scientists who are pretty much archaeologists and paleontologists at this point. They know what they find, they catalog their finds, and they make them available to scientists to research. But we also get people who are just walking the dog and then pick up a weird looking stick and come to the museum and we're like, actually, that is a Mesolithic barbed point and a beautiful one.
With some dog teeth marks in it now, but thank you.
And what makes it such fun is that whenever, as an archaeologist, if you work with volunteers or citizen scientists, for example, with metal detectorists, which is not always legal in the Netherlands, you have to sort of test the waters. That pun was intended. Of whether they're, meeting the legal standard when they're collecting or not. Whereas the Doggerland finds, they're ex situ anyway. So the worst thing you can do if you spot something is not pick it up, because then it's going to roll back out to sea. So it sort of gives you a freedom to really collaborate with these people.
Yeah.
See, I was going to ask that question because even if it's a stray find in the UK, and I wonder what it's like in the Netherlands if you have sort of a similar setup. Well, in the UK, it's sort of split. So in England, you have finds liaison officers. So if there's anything that's kind of found, they take it to them for each county, and then they can get a reward or something, and it's claimed under kind of the Queen and things like that, certain... If it's metal and things like
King,
that.
surely. No.
Yeah. Oh, shudders. I forgot about that. I'm such a monarchist, right?
You can tell where your loyalties lie.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm in Scotland, so it tells you a lot. But in Scotland, we have treasure trove, and pretty much everything in treasure trove, anything you find, can be claimed by treasure trove, and there are legal kind of frameworks around that. So I did wonder, in the Netherlands, do you just go to the National Museum and you talk to someone, or do you have these kind of liaison officers to chat to if you do find something? And kind of how does that work when it's it's ex situ and you can't really locate the context of that find? So
that is actually a very simple question with a complicated answer that we're not really sure yet.
That's what we specialize in.
So, Mike, for me, the work I'm currently doing on Doggerland is actually a stakeholder research project for the other research projects to figure out what everybody is doing, what they need, and also what the legal requirements are of the people finding these things. Because in practice, everybody's encouraged to collect what they find. If there's any risk of it being, for example, if you find human remains and you're not sure that they're, Stone Age, please call the police, that kind of thing. But it turns out actually the legal requirements are a bit more complicated. So there seems to be a bit of a disconnect between the law and the practice encouraged by all archaeologists, including the Cultural Heritage Agency. Because technically, everything that you find you even suspect could be an archaeological artifact, you're supposed to report to the Cultural Heritage Agency or through various liaisons to that agency. But doing that is not actually that simple. And they also really don't want every single piece of bone and every single piece of flint being reported, because it would just completely flood the system.
Can confirm, yeah.
So we're trying to come up with a better infrastructure for reporting these finds. But there's no Dutch law that means you would have to give up your find, which is an important thing, because we do find that some collectors are hesitant to work with scientists because they're afraid that their finds will be confiscated. But in the Netherlands, the only thing that can be confiscated would be if it can be labeled a treasure find, literally translated. And that has to be, I think the wording of the law is something along the lines of intentionally hidden of value. And, these are not intentionally hidden artifacts. So it's a bit of a gray area, but generally speaking, collectors are encouraged to report their finds to an archaeologist, which can be, at the museum or local museums or the Cultural Heritage Agency or the local, municipal archaeologist. And all the archaeologists working on Doggerland know all the other archaeologists working on Doggerland. So eventually finds end up with the person researching it.
Which I'm curious, Ash, this is definitely something that we need to consider when we're doing our project proposal, because I am not actually sure what the law is in our world, in this fantasy world, in terms of treasure trove or finds liaison or cultural heritage agency. We definitely need to find the something about that. Maybe that's a future episode that we can talk about.
I have the answer to that. We are the law.
Oh, that's true. There you go. Easy. Sorted. 4 words. Saves on paper. Okay, great. Okay, so let's go back to our particular scenario, our little quest that we've been given by Dr. Ottalp to write a project proposal in order to investigate the ancient underwater landscape of Sitnalta. So it sounds very similar to Doggerland in that indeed I don't know if there are any actual like civilizations on there. I think that it's similar, just a big landmass that probably had people living there. As we've established, Ash and I are not very good in terms of claustrophobic underwater things. I don't mind doing diving, which is weird considering I'm claustrophobic, but anyway. But I don't know, there's a lot going on down there. I don't really have time to find all my diving kit. So I think that actually the sort of scenarios that you've suggested in terms of using sort of researchers from different backgrounds, collaborating with citizen scientists, I think that sounds like a really good idea. What do you think, Ash?
Yeah, I think so. I think that sounds like a really easy way of doing it where I don't have to get into a suit or go into water. So yeah, I think I was going to say field walking, but not field walking. It's beach walking.
Beach walking. Oh no, we have to go for walks along the beach.
Oh no,
that's terrible.
Yeah. That's awful.
And maybe we can recruit some gnomes to help us since I've gotten in with them.
And
with
lobsters.
My hat.
And lobsters, of course, the lobster team.
We'll get a mermaid.
They can be our shallows, excavation team.
The shallow excavation.
Yeah.
That'd be cool. We could get some trays going, to kind of shake out all the sand and check.
Get some
what are they
sieving.
called? Sieving. I couldn't remember the word for sieving.
I do think there might be a problem finding high-vis vests to fit the lobsters.
We can just paint their shell.
we can. Oh, that'd be sweet.
We can paint their shell in little special, and they can decide what pattern they want on their shell. And stuff.
Yeah, and I don't think, to be honest, considering we're the law, I feel like we could forgo the.
We can make an allowance. Yeah,
they're in the
they
natural
already have
habitat.
a hard hat, right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Great minds. That's great minds. Yeah, perfect. And then, as you've mentioned, Sasha, it's maybe not possible to do this as like one single project. So we might have to focus on like a particular aspect of what we would want to research, which, sounds good. And then would you be interested, Sasha, in helping us to create an exhibition and write a book about it at the end?
Absolutely, but only if I get to collaborate with lobsters.
That's a given. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll promise that. Yeah.
Thank you. Then, yes, I'm on board.
Great. Well, that's the end of this episode of Am I Trowel. We hope that you enjoyed our quest today, and thank you so much to Sasha for joining us today. It was great to have you on.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
So if you enjoyed our quest today, please leave us a review wherever you listen to us. It really helps to support both us and the rest of the Archaeology Podcast Network. As always, if you have any ideas for future episodes, or even if you want to discuss a past episode more, you can contact us through social media or also join the free APN Discord server. We'd really love to hear your feedback, so definitely get in touch. All contact information for us and for Sasha, as well as further readings and links to the points discussed today, can be found in the show notes.
What is that sound?
What sound?
Roll for perception.
Oh, that's an 18. And yes, now you mention it, Ash, I can hear a sound. It sounds like arrows flying through the air. And it also sounds like, and I know this might sound a bit weird, it sounds like love.
Oh, no. I think I know exactly what's happened. We're going to have to call someone, or at least maybe 2 people, for reinforcements for the next quest, I think.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultural Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.